I'm one of these essentially liberal-minded white people. I'm like open to the other. I carried around National Geographic magazines when I was a kid, to the ridicule, because I was so fascinated with ethnography, and I was one of those white people that Christian Lander talks about, who's always trying to become an expert in somebody else's culture. That was me, and along with that goes a willingness to take certain social risks. So I said, "Fuck it, these people look a little weird, but I'm going to take the risk." So
it's funny because if you know, I'm sorry to interrupt, but it's funny you say that, because I think that for many of the kind of white people you're talking about, or liberal white people, that they're not so liberal on that. I mean, this might be a little bit of a derailment of your story, but
oh no, exactly. I mean, because white people have this weird dual consciousness. Because on the one hand, the liberal-minded white person is extremely, I'm in Seattle right now, right? It's just like uber Nordic in Seattle, culturally, and still the population is very Nordic. In Seattle, they have the biggest Norwegian Independence Day parade outside of Norway, for instance.
Huh. It's funny. I've been to the Sit to My parade in New York City, and it actually exists, and it's not that small. Although it's been years, probably 20 years since that, maybe a little less than that, since I went. But I have Norwegian ancestry, and my mother's house is completely decked out in all Norwegian stuff. But yeah, there's actually one in New York City, and it's fairly large. It's probably not as big as the one in Seattle, though.
Yeah, but it's a very Nordic place. One of the things about Seattleites, and one of these things about Pacific Northwest people, and I'm one of them, is a stranger comes up to you, somebody from out of town, they're speaking English a little oddly, they ask directions, and you're just like, oh, yes, it's over here, and everybody's super welcoming to strangers. But on the other hand, if they sense that one of their own people is not on board with being super welcoming to strangers, they come down on them like a ton of bricks.
Well,
right?
This is the sort of the paradox of the high trust society. And Kevin MacDonald talks about this when he talks about sort of I don't want to call it the sort of weakness of white people, but it's the trait, it's the character that is able to be exploited by other elements, and Jewish philosophers and media critics and things like that, particularly, I would say, because they're very skilled verbally, is this high trust notion of we have this high trust amongst each other, and one of the ways that we maintain it is through sort of monitoring. And it sounds kind of creepy when you put it that way, but it's not really. It's sort of like we all sort of look at the behavior of others in the community and make sure that they're on board with the norms. But when those norms become perverted, then problems happen, if you get what I'm saying.
Oh, yeah, I totally agree with this analysis. And, yeah, one of the reasons why European societies and more, especially Northern European societies, are so capable of creating highly functional, scalable institutions that allow to operate to do great things is because we're essentially very individualistic, and we are prone to trust, and we also have enough conscience as individuals to not betray that trust. And so we are constantly taking social risks with strangers, and we're constantly, goaded by our own conscientiousness to keep our promises with strangers. And that makes it possible for us to create great civilizations, whereas people who are not as willing or capable of trusting strangers and not as willing or capable of keeping promises to strangers, or people who are not outside your closely defined ethnic in-group, those societies are brittle, and they cannot create and sustain large-scale institutions. And the ones that they do tend to be, if you peel the veneer off, simply ethnic mafias, family mafias, or tribal mafias. But those are weak institutions, because if you are constrained by nepotism, you cannot put the best person in the job, right? And so they're corrupt, they're nepotistic, and they're consequently brittle under pressure, and they have very, very marked, strong, how to put it, limits on their ability to scale up. Because you can't just bring in anybody to your ethnic mafia. They've got to be your fourth cousin or something. And if you run out of fourth cousins, well, you run out of people you can trust, and that means that your government or your business or your tribe, whatever it is going to be limited in its capacity.
Yeah, and I don't know if you've ever heard of Curt Doolittle or know about Curt Doolittle. If you've heard the name.
His interview.
Yeah.
I thought he was really interesting.
Yeah, I mean, because the things you guys are saying, using slightly different language and terms, are basically the same narrative here. Because he has developed highly specific terms for things like this, like white people, Northern European white people particularly, high trust, absolute nuclear family centered, create commons because of this high trust, etc. And that's basically what you were talking about. You know, he calls sort of the strong institutions, he refers to that as commons, because it's not simply the property owners of the institutions, but the whole society that benefits. And white people, he even says something, one of his lines is like, white people, particularly Northern Europeans, consider telling the truth as paying a tax into the commons, and we willingly do it, because we understand that everybody's better off when we do it, and that's a trait that's specific to sort of our people, our ethnic group. And I'm mostly Northern European. I'm some Southern European, some Slavic, but mostly Northern European. And I get like this like touches something kind of deeply inside of me. If you understand, if you can relate to what I'm saying.
Totally. And one of the philosophers that I've studied the most is Immanuel Kant, and he has this formulation of the categorical imperative, where he says that you should act according to the only maxims you should follow, moral maxims you should follow, are those you could will to be universal laws. Now that is a very peculiar idea, and he also talks about acting as if you were a citizen of a kingdom of ends, a particular kind of order where people are rational agents who are ends in themselves, and you have non-exploitative relationships with them. It's basically talking about free individuals, and there's an idealism there. Mm-hmm. Because the fact of the matter is that you don't live in a kingdom of ends, right?
No.
But what you're doing is you're not acting according to the real world you're living in. You're acting according to the world you'd like to live in. And in so doing, you are incurring risks in this world. But we feel very high-mindedly committed to the idea that we should still take these actions because we're creating a better world. And that's
true across left and right for white people.
Oh, yeah, most totally. And this is why it's very, very difficult to convince them, to change their course. Because in a certain way, the fact that it might not be working out right now, the fact that they might be being exploited or being subverted in some ways because of their idealistic course of action, if you bring that up, they're going to say, essentially the reaction is going to be, well, look, you're just being small-minded, petty, and selfish, and if we persevere in this course, we will overcome this and we will create the utopia.
Yep.
And, it's only mean, petty people who give up at this stage of the way. Well, the trouble is that is not a functional attitude anymore. That particular kind of high-mindedness, where we actually measure the sublimity of our actions by the difficulties that it creates for us personally. And we can't do that forever. We can't do that forever because we are locked in a struggle now with people who are evolutionarily and culturally calibrated to exploit those characteristics as weaknesses.
Yes, no, completely. And the thing I like to say, or other people have said to me, and I've now adopted, if it's not reciprocated, you're not really living by the principle.
Exactly.
So it's not being reciprocated.
Yeah, exactly. It's not being reciprocated. But the idea is that, well, yes, it's not being reciprocated now, but eventually, if we can just show our goodwill and show them how wonderful we are, because white people really do believe that we are wonderful, that the way that we live is the best possible way, and that literally everybody would want to live this way. And when you go, to, I don't know, you go to some uber white place like Stockholm or something like that, and you see how beautiful everything is, how everything works really well, how kind people are. Well, why wouldn't you believe that the whole world wants that?
I want it.
I want it, and so everybody else must want it too. We have this assumption that everybody's just like us, and they're not. And we've finally encountered people that we cannot assimilate into our in-group. One of the things that's most beneficial about this openness to strangers, and Kevin McDonald talks about this as evolving with hunter-gatherers in the Ice Age of the North, is that you're a small group of people and you encounter another group of people that you can actually trust and cooperate with, your chances of surviving that long winter have gone up. And because we have been open to strangers, and the strangers we've been open to are basically the same kind of people as us who will reciprocate in kind, we have been able to build a great civilization. But that civilization has gone out all over the world, and we've encountered people who are not like us, and who look upon us as basically marks. Jews basically come to our societies like hackers. This is something Matt Parrott used, and I think it's really good. Like hackers come to a website. They probe it for its weaknesses that they
find the exploit.
Yeah, and that's what they're doing.
That's hacker terminology for you.
That the goy, is always friendly with strangers, willing to give strangers the benefit of the doubt, and they will exploit that over and over again. And even when it doesn't work out in our favor, they'll still keep doing it because their high-mindedness is so pegged to the idea that if they can just show that they're big, we're big, we can take it, and if we just persist in this liberal, open course, we will convert these people into being part of us, and we'll have utopia. It's not working, it's destroying us, and we need to make ourselves conscious of this dynamic so that we can inhibit it when it is no longer functional for us. It helped us create a great civilization when we encountered people like us. Now that we're not encountering people like us, it's a weakness that's leading to our downfall.
Yeah, and I think part of it is also the thing that makes it difficult is that in some sense, when the people that aren't like us are like Africans, that's one thing. Because at some point, it's like, okay, we need to, the differences there are so obvious that there actually were, there was racism and there was exclusion, and then in South Africa, they formed territories. Here's for whites, here's for blacks, etc. And even in the American South, things like that. And because the differences were so obvious and apparent that it couldn't work out. But when you have a very small group like the Jews, and they're very high in their verbal IQ, and they are able to present as us, and then they can kind of hack this narrative, as we've said. They can hack the high trust mechanisms that we use to have created our civilizations. It's very damaging, and essentially now, and then what Kevin McDonald calls the culture of the Holocaust, where this idea that we constantly have to be atoning, and now we can out-signal each other. Signaling is a word that we've hit on. It's one of our sort of TRS terms that we've hit on, is a thing that people do, and increasingly we've been calling people out for their signaling. So moral signaling, it's one of the ways. It's a fundamental communication strategy that we have, but it also it's been hacked. I agree with you. It's been hacked. So the moral signaling is that we have to atone. We have to never let this happen again. It's because of our fundamental barbarity that we can never let happen again. That this horrible thing in the past happened, any kind of prejudice that's shown will lead directly to this. And so now white people compete with each other. It's really a very competitive thing to be the one who out morally signals the next. And it's unhealthy. We have to stop.